What do you notice when you see the Daily Mail reporter confronted on the porch? If you look closer and look carefully, almost cut off at the bottom of the screen are the ears of the family dog. And what do we notice about this dog? It didn't seem to bark to alert anyone that someone had come to the property uninvited. It didn't bark to alert anyone that there was a trespasser on the property. What does this mean? I got nightmares in my head. I feel my minds. Hello and welcome to Crime Files 24. An Australian news site, thenightly.com.au, recently posted 5 unanswered questions regarding the mysterious disappearance of 5-year-old Gusto Martin Una that was on the 27th of September. We are now moving quite quickly to the 2-month anniversary. We're basically 2 weeks shy of Gus being missing for 2 whole months. In this analysis, we will attempt to answer those 5 questions. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Number 1. Why was the search scaled back to a recovery operation so early in the process? And this is the question posed by thenightly.com.au. And I think the first way to respond to that is, was it early? Was it scaled back early? Or was it scaled back at the right time? Well, according to thenightly.com, the police search for Gus was called off and scaled back from a rescue operation to a recovery mission on day 7 of the young boy's disappearance, about a week after he disappeared. I don't think that's early, do you? To me, the issue here isn't the police investigation or a defective search. I don't think that's the right area to pay attention to, although I wouldn't say that either were perfect by any means. But the issue is that there is so little evidence, and because of that, because there is so little evidence, Gus's disappearance seems strange, even suspicious. No scent trail, no shoe prints, no clothing, no witnesses, and perhaps weirdest of all, Gus's family. They seem to have nothing to say about this. They have others to speak on their behalf. In fact, the only statement that has been made directly to the media thus far in 6 weeks is to say, "Are you deaf? Shut your face and get out." But to answer the question more directly, why was the search scaled back? Well, because the authorities believe Gus is dead. According to thenightly.com, in the initial stages, police had hoped to find Gus alive, but sadly the search has become a recovery operation. That's what South Australia Police said in a statement. South Australia Police Assistant Commissioner Ian Parrott explained that this decision was made based on scientific advice. I think another question to ask is whether given perfect search techniques, and let's say maximum resources and deployments, whether there was much of a chance of finding Gus anyway. You know, if he was hidden on land known by locals with local knowledge, and if they had a lot of time to not only do this but cover up evidence, then there never really was any hope for a successful search to begin with. So, was he hidden or was he taken? And we'll get to that in the final question. But first, number 2, could Gus have been abducted despite the police ruling out foul play? And that brings us to the number 6 clue we all missed, and that is that dog that was on the property, right? We assume that dog would have barked if someone trespassed, but not necessarily. In fact, the Daily Mail reporter arriving unannounced seems to prove the dog wouldn't have barked if there was an abduction. The dog wouldn't have barked if there was someone wandering on the property. Doesn't it seem that way? But there are at least 3 serious problems with this abduction theory. Probably the dog wasn't even home, but with Josie and Jesse tending to the sheep, assuming that part of the story is even true. Second, the sun was still up at 5:30 p.m. when Gus supposedly vanished. And if that was the case, dust trails would have been left behind. And we see these dust trails in media footage of the searches. You can see even from a long distance away, you can see that a vehicle is moving in that area. And the roads to the station are all dust roads. You literally can't drive to the station on tar because there isn't any. It's also unlikely an abduction wouldn't have involved a vehicle because no tracks were found of anyone else either. And although I'm not sure this was looked into, I wonder whether any other kind of vehicle tracks were, whether they attempted to identify other vehicle tracks besides the vehicles that were on site. Now, the third issue with an abduction is more speculative. But consider the family demeanor this far in this case. You would imagine in a real situation where someone had taken Gus, these folks would feel furious about what had happened. Think about that, as absolutely unacceptable. Invasion of privacy and of, the family safety, but I don't get a sense of that at all. Instead, they seem strangely passive and silent, and what's more, not angry or indignant at what happened, and not wanting to find a perpetrator or even identify a suspect, but angry instead at people who want to know what happened. Another thing is, if they believe that there was an abduction, you would imagine they would have taken steps like enhancing security, putting up cameras, even putting some kind of fencing around the station itself, just upgrading the security. Are we seeing any of that taking place? No. And I think that speaks volumes as well. So, I don't think Gus was abducted, and I don't think he wandered off. I think the truth is somewhere in between. That brings us to number 3. Why was there only one footprint found, and why has it been cast into doubt? Well, the nightly position is that the footprint found less than a kilometer away from the homestead is the only physical evidence of Gus's movement since he went missing. I think the single footprint actually provides an interesting insight. If it is Gus's footprint, the question is, how did it get there? Well, I don't think he walked that kilometer. I think it's more likely he was driven there and driven back. And I think if you had a vehicle in the fabric of the story, and I think there is then the search area actually becomes immense. And from the family's own version of events, a vehicle from the station was for a field, and possibly moving around. At the time, they say Gus went missing. This is from their own story. That brings us to number 4. Where did Gus go after he was last seen? I don't think Gus went anywhere. I think he was taken somewhere. Also, don't think the story about him playing on a mound of dirt is accurate. I think the timeline and the story surrounding it are the reason Gus hasn't been found. Think about the John Burnett Ramsey case. If there was no ransom note, what would have happened? Well, John Burnett would have been found inside the house, and a lot sooner than she was, and the people who would have been suspected would have been different to those who were initially suspected. If we remove the wandered-off story, it's possible Gus could have been found sooner as well. Number 5, is Gus hidden or trapped? Well, this is the key question, isn't it? In my opinion, hidden. I think that is the more likely answer here, although trapped is possible. Now, another boy who wandered off story that I covered played out in Colorado Springs actually wrote a book about that. Initially, there didn't seem to be any evidence of Gannon's stalk, but crucially, there wasn't any evidence of him wandering off either. Eventually, traces of blood were found under his bed, and weeks later, a body was discovered in a suitcase next to a highway in faraway Florida. And also, there are innocent explanations for why children go missing, such as Harley Dilly, who skipped school and after vanishing for 3 weeks was found dead in a chimney in an empty house across the road. But that boy was 10 years older than Gus. This boy was too young to wander very far, and it was too late in the day. One imagines for him to want to wander anywhere anyway. Besides, who wanders off just before dinner? I think the fact that Gus was at a delicate age when he is the responsibility of whoever is looking after him, unlike Harley Dilly. I think that's significant, and so if something does happen to him, then someone could bear criminal responsibility. And so perhaps that is being hidden along with the evidence that something did happen, and that evidence would be Gus himself. There's also the issue that because Gus's biological parent was not allowed on the property, but he is the person, one of two, who was most directly responsible for the little boy. While with him being out of the picture, basically pushed out of the picture, someone else necessarily needs to be his custodian. And who was that? And perhaps this stand-in either didn't want to, couldn't, or if or when something happened, felt it was unfair to be held responsible for a parenting role that wasn't strictly speaking theirs, or perhaps someone else felt that way on their behalf. Remember, there's also another little boy in the story as well, Ronnie. And if it turns out someone didn't look after Gus as they should have, Ronnie could be removed for safety, just as we saw in the summer. Wells' case with Summer's siblings, that could be another reason to hide what had actually happened. Despite this, the authorities seem to have another theory that there's no foul play, that the family are innocent and trustworthy, and their opinion is that Gus likely wandered off. But does that make sense? Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.